It's time to bring in David Tereshchuk. It's time for the Media Beat. Of course, David joins us live on a Friday morning, and then we switch things around, and over the course of the weekend, David gets his rebroadcast, and then Monday after the 12 noon news, David once again is rebroadcast here on Robin Hood Radio. David has his own website, themediabeat.us, and he's also a PBS television correspondent who reports on ethics and belief. Good morning, David. How are you today?
Well, I'm well. I'm reporting in as should happen every week from the media capital of the world, New York City. It's almost as cold here as it is up with you.
It's just the way it is, you know. It's March.
An ordinary March day, as you said, yeah.
Well, you know, we might have cold weather here, but this is an interesting story. And it's very rare that when two nations get together in a meeting, that in that meeting gets heated in just the introductory remarks. And this happened yesterday between the U.S. and China. Yes,
the Biden administration has promised to put our relationship with China on a new footing. Less of the confusion, less of the hostility. Well, we'll see about that, because it began in a pretty hostile way. There was certainly not much, in that wonderful old phrase, not much mincing of words between the people. Not many words got minced. The words were pretty straightforward. And yes, they accused each other of all the things that you might expect them to accuse each other, though they did so in an openly spoken and plain-spoken way that you don't normally associate with diplomatic communications, and it was almost like a breath of fresh air, I suppose. But it certainly didn't augur well for an improvement in Chinese-United States relations. But I guess maybe the air just has to be ventilated a bit before they get down to saying the sorts of things that you need to say if you want to get along better with another nation.
Well, I think, you know, when I first read this story, I said that exact same thing to myself. It's better to start off the meeting and get all the negative cards out on the table, get past those negative cards, know that it's going to take a while to work on those negative statements from both, you know, on both sides, and get on to other things that the two countries can agree on and move forward on, and that's basically starting a new footing, really.
Yeah, and one of the things that came from the American side was interestingly, in a way, it said something which I think wouldn't normally get said in a diplomatic exchange, in that it did a little bit of almost psychobabble analysis of the side on the other side of the table. When the Americans said that one of the hallmarks of a mature nation like America is presenting itself as being in this meeting, is that with strong democratic institutions, such a nation like the United States could be self-critical and take in notions that were critical of it, and consider its ways and perhaps change its ways too. This is the hallmark of a well-adjusted country, I suppose. I'm paraphrasing them entirely here, but that was the main thrust of the message. And of course, China did not take to that well. It accused America, surprise, surprise, of hypocrisy about the matter of being self-critical. But it was an interesting ground on which to couch, yes, self-promotion, but also deprecation of an opponent, to accuse them of being so sensitive, I suppose, is what they were saying about China, is that they couldn't take criticism, and that spoke of a rigidity of outlook and a fearfulness about how much prevalence they're able to exert over their own population as a ruling authority, talking about the Chinese Communist Party here, of course, it was a sign of immaturity and incapacity as a nation. The thrust of the criticism is all to be expected, but it was for me it was a relatively novel way that America was prompted in this case to talk about itself. It's that much is certainly different from the way that America has been talking, or at least America's leading spokesperson, if you like, for the last 4 years. That's one of the Commander-in-Chief's main jobs, of course, to be the national spokesman in an international setting. And the idea of America being open to the idea that it can be criticized and can be self-critical, in contrast with a dictatorship like China, which cannot bear any criticism at all, is an interestingly subtle change. The fact that it's being uttered in this venue has a degree of subtlety. But the contrast between this administration's approach and the previous one couldn't be clearer and sharper.
And what's great about it is the confrontation comes between diplomats, not in a Twitter war. That's what's great about it. No, really.
Oh, that's a big difference too. You're quite right, of course. Yes. Diplomacy by Twitter is not really. Just simply not a facet of this administration's way of working, is it?
No. Now, I want to. We could talk about Biden and Putin, but I want to leave that to the side there because that is what it is. But I want to
talk about diplomatic language.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
If you call the leader of another country a killer, then you're not exactly observing the niceties of the profession, are you?
But let's move on to the horrible thing that happened once again in this country, where 8 people were shot dead. 6 of them happened to be of Asian descent, and
7 of them female.
Female.
Yes.
There's a problem that has been unleashed in this country, and as I said, I'm not going to blame Donald Trump expressly, but the language and the rhetoric that has been used since he first declared for president a year ahead of time and through the 4 years has definitely emboldened people who are dissatisfied with their lot in life to take it out on minorities.
Yes, indeed. Now, whether or not there is the evidence required to charge the arrested suspect in this case with a hate crime, a race hate crime, is not at all certain. Indeed, the director of the FBI is already on record with one of his very rare broadcast interviews that he gave to NPR yesterday. He's actually saying that there doesn't appear to be strong enough evidence here for a race hate charge against this alleged killer, which takes, of course, by surprise and disappoints enormously Asian Americans who have been suffering over the last year, and of course much longer, but over the last year it has been greatly heightened, the kind of rhetoric and the kind of street talk, as well as rhetoric in supposedly high places, aimed at them. And inevitably, it looks, it smells, it tastes like a race crime, and yet it may not be possible to charge him with such a kind of offense. Although Georgia didn't used to have, but in very recent times, just over the last year or so, has passed legislation at the state level, which allows people to be charged with hate crimes if they focus upon a person's race or gender or sexual orientation and other markers of that kind. So it's an open question still whether it's going to be possible to charge this individual with what is technically speaking, or can be claimed to be technically speaking, a race crime. One of the difficulties thrown up by this case is that the argument that says that it doesn't seem like a race crime because he was talking his own evidence supposedly given to law enforcement officials didn't focus on race or gender at all. Well, that's not true. It certainly focused on gender, in that he was claiming that these premises that in which he launched his attacks were centers for sexual activity that he found so tempting that he had to destroy them. Since when have legal judgments about the nature of a prosecution, the terms of a prosecution, been determined by the vocabulary used and the notions chosen by the suspect, the alleged perpetrator himself? That's not the best of guides, as you say, just to lay out the facts of the case. 6 out of 7 of the people, all of one particular ethnicity, is a major factor in itself, and perhaps ought to count for more than what the alleged perpetrator is said to have said, and the way that it's been interpreted. I think one of the most dispiriting aspects of the case, of course, is the sheriff's spokesman involved, a man at the rank of captain, who tried to explain the alleged perpetrator's motivations here, and actually described him as having had a bad day, being at the end of his rope, and then doing what he did. And more has been discovered about this particular officer of the law, a sheriff's spokesman, that suggests that he shares some of those anti-Asian ethnicity slurring attitudes that seem to be at the heart of this crime, this horrible crime.
We're speaking, of course, with David Tereshchuk. It's the Media Beat. David's website is themediabeat.us. And I guess before we move on to other things, I did once again read when I got up this morning, and the Republican leader in the House, McCarthy, once again stated that, quote, he did not back Trump's efforts to overturn the election. It used to be, I once went through one of my first divorces, David, where my lawyer looked at me and said, "You stick to your story, and you just stick to it. No matter what's said, you just stick to it, because sooner or later they can find out whether or not it's true." Now, what happens with these Republicans is they say things and they don't care that if you go back and play back what they said, it's the exact opposite of what they said. I've just never seen anything like this on a mass scale like this, where you can just say what you want and basically ignore or try to pretend that the videotape doesn't exist.
Yes, it's extraordinary how excuse me. It's extraordinary how brazen people can get, even in the age of social media, and the internet's operation in general, which is that on the whole, apart from these self-destruction apps and the like that have developed for obvious reasons, that on the whole everything now is on record, one way or another. Your past tweets, your past social media postings, anything that's digitized and put into the ether on the internet is there to be found, and yet people seem to have, in the general sort of increase in loquacity, if I can be gentle in my choice of words, amongst people who speak in the public forums, you'll find at the same time this extraordinary blindness to the fact that everything that is said can be held against you. In that famous phrase, when your Miranda rights are being read to you, they can be held against you if you rely upon a contradictory statement at some point, when there is clear and spoken and recorded evidence of you saying the exact opposite some time before. And of course, the traditional defense for such things is that my views may have evolved. But in this case, it's so often such a direct contradiction that people are actually allowing themselves to go in for, that the brazenness certainly does stagger the mind and drop the jaw.
I guess I wouldn't mind that I've evolved. My stance is, my position has changed. But just acting like it didn't happen. I'm just
Yes.
Americans tend to accept it. So it's just one of those things that you look at. Now, you had pre-warned me in advance that we might need a certain sound effect. Are we ready for that or no?
Well, yes, I'd like to give the sound effect for the bugle, the fanfare. Let's hear it.
Let's go. Here we go. There we go.
It's for the Daily Beast this week, a journalistic organization which is not exactly, in my mind, to the forefront of our profession. It began some time ago as a mischievous kind of name for a mischievous but well-meaning and serious-minded organization. Its first editor was Tina Brown. But it's gone into a sort of fuzzy area of part news reporting, but a lot more opinionating. Much to my regret, as I look at the media scene altogether, so much of our media is just opinionation now, oblivation, as it was once called by a New York Times writer who had worked for Richard Nixon, of all people. But that's by the by. The important thing is that the Daily Beast this week has done some really important digging work, just straightforward journalistic research, and contributed to what we've just been talking about in the case, the appalling case of the massage spas killings in Atlanta, Georgia. It was the Daily Beast that discovered that the captain I was talking about, the captain in the sheriff's department, the county sheriff, Cherokee County in Georgia, he's the man who, it turns out, owns a business printing T-shirts and would appear to be have a record through his promotion of his products of some distinctly anti-Asian ethnic slurring attitudes of his own. Not only was he to be heard in the last 48 hours, almost excusing, it sounds like to many people, the approach of the alleged killer, talking about him having had a bad day and being at the end of his rope. And not only that, but the products he was promoting in his social media presence amounted to T-shirts with a biohazard symbol on them, with the slogan that referred to COVID-19 as a disease from China. We recognize that the spelling there with a Y and a hyphen, which has been used by Trump supporters to represent Trump's own idiosyncratic pronunciation of the country's name, giving it an extra edge of unpleasantness, to say the least. But there we have it, an officer of the law. Evidence here coming to the fore, thanks to some journalistic work, showing that he's hardly worthy of his office, and indeed has been suspended, maybe on the way to being fired and no longer working in the realm of law enforcement. That's a sidelight, a really regrettable sidelight, which is distressing in several different ways. But wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for a set of journalists who got their antennae attenuated to pick up the background of people who come into the fore. And now you discover that something that we should none of us be surprised by, that the ranks of law enforcement in a particular jurisdiction should have the outlook that they appear to have as they tackle this really sensitive case.
You know, it's interesting because this happened during 4 years ago, during the upcoming run up to the election in 2016 and also in 2020, where police officers, not even on their own cars, put political bumper stickers on their cruisers. Well, now they were inside the cruisers, but they were still visible to the outside. And there's a difference with you have a personal car, that's your car, and you want to put a bumper sticker on it. That's perfectly okay, but there are lines that are not to be crossed. And if you want to have a business that prints T-shirts that says disparaging things about a segment of the population, well then, run the business, but have the business in somebody else's, your family's name. It's not hard to kind of follow some simplistic rules to at least make it look like you haven't prejudged somebody.
Well, yes, I'm not in the business of advising people on how to avoid getting caught, but it does seem to me that to do this kind of thing when you are in a public position, and you are a servant of the public, which of course this particular captain would be and was until suspended, but to hold that position. And yet indulge in this kind of slurring and ethnicity-based offensiveness may in itself amount to a crime. But even if it doesn't, it's certainly inappropriate. And it requires, as you say, some thought about, it calls for some thought about what you're doing and whether it's appropriate for you to do it, given what profession you're in, what public trust you're meant to hold. But of course, thoughtfulness is not a characteristic that's been much on display here.
No, and I bring that back to what I said about President Trump. Or Donald Trump businessman, Donald Trump millionaire, can say whatever he wants, and it has no ramification. But when you become president, when you become a senator, when you become a congressperson, your words do have extra meaning. They carry the weight, whether people believe, whether it's true or not, of the United States government of which you serve. They carry the weight of the police department of which you serve. It's just part of the general things that are happening in every different class level in this country, where people just don't give a damn what they say, when they say it, how it offends people, or how it affects other people who work with them on the same job. It's just amazing.
Yeah, the attitude or the value on display here is what we're talking about. Concerns the question of responsibility, and public responsibility is clear. It may be hard to define in certain individual cases, but it's rather like the elephant. We know it when we see it. It's hard to describe, but we know it when we see it. And this case was a case of arrant irresponsibility, and offensiveness, and possibly breaking of one of Georgia's own recently enacted laws as well.
All right, David, we'll check with you again next week. Have a great week. And once again, remind people they can visit the site, themediabeat.us.
Thank you. talk to you next week.
Take care. David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat. And if you missed any portion of this and you want to get more of it, we have it online, robinhoodradio.com. Click on demand. Click on the Media Beat with David Tereshchuk.